Yeah. And people ask me all the time, hey, you're an Olympian. Why don't you market towards athletes? And I'm like, because they haven't made the health switch yet.
Yeah.
And every high school, every college, every stadium sports team is either a Coke or a Pepsi team.
Yeah.
So you can't get in, and we don't have the money to be able to, beat Coke or Pepsi. But we did. We took our bars once down on the Chargers. The Chargers facility was right by one of my restaurants in Kearny Mesa for years, and their management ordered lunch almost every day, and we loved it. Right? We'd see the what was the guy's name? Not Santos, but him, the old
Oh,
owner of the
oh, I
Chargers.
don't recall. I don't really. I've worked in
We'd see their name.
professional. Yeah, I've worked in
Yeah, I know.
professional sports so much that I find that it's just like a shit show of spoiled children. So
Yeah.
I know too much about the insides of it.
Yeah, so we loved it, right? Because they were buying a bunch of big sandwiches, extra turkey, they get chips, they get drinks, they get all the stuff, the whole package. And their assistant would come up every day. The players weren't eating it, but the coaches were. And this was a lot of food, and it was good business for us. They ended up moving, obviously, but they invited us down to like player day at their training facility once. And so we brought our little bars down there, and we were so excited. We're like, oh man, these pro athletes are going to see our stuff, and it's going to be so great. And they're going to stop eating, like all the junky bars. And they'd come up to our booth, and they're holding a big gulp, literally big gulps. And it just hit me then. I was like, I was that athlete, so I get their mentality. They're not there yet because they're 20,
Hmm.
25.
Yes.
They're crushing it. They think they are,
Yes.
they
Well, they
think they
are.
are.
They are crushing it in two ways. They're making a
Yeah.
lot of money, but they're making a lot of pain for themselves in the future. They just don't realize it yet.
Yeah. They don't know it yet. I didn't know it. And it's worse now than it was when I was that age. I mean, GMOs weren't in our food until 96. And that's when, so I'd already been competing, since what, 85 or something without them. But then they entered our food system, and just as another layer of toxins in our body.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why we don't talk to that core group of athletes, because they don't get it yet. So
Yeah, it's a very interesting situation, and I honestly don't think I've ever worked with an elite athlete that didn't have serious imbalances in their nutrition that was directly related to the structural or physical pain that they were seeing with, or even emotional issues. And so it's always quite a journey to realize that it's a person's not going to switch until they are motivated to, usually because something's causing them pain or they're up against a wall. So it's change
right.
or die kind of mentality. And it's just hard because one of the things that our culture is very confused about, due to the way university nutrition programs are directed, is people think that food is strictly energy, and so they shop for food like they shop for gasoline.
Yeah.
They don't have a concept as food as medicine, or food as information that the body uses to direct, heal, regenerate its biological systems. So they really just have a shopper's mentality for food, and it's really quite a problem. And as you probably know, I wrote my book How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. I think we published it in 2004, and people used to think I was nuts. They really thought,
Yeah, I bet. I bet.
food's just food, man. What are you so wound up about all this food stuff for? I say, oh, really? Then why are you laying on my treatment table right now?
It's the concept of it being so hard for people to understand that it's connected.
Yeah,
It's like literally connected, right? It's in your body.
yeah,
So the fact that you think it's not connected doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I'm not a doctor, right? But I have to go with common sense, because it just blows my mind. And you're right. We were taught food is fuel.
yeah,
There were 8 McDonald's inside our Olympic Village in 96. 8
yeah,
pop up little restaurants to feed the 10,000 athletes. There was also a cafeteria and all these other places, a barber, so you can spend your 3 weeks there at the Olympics and have a little village. But 8 McDonald's, and they were full of athletes in their most critical time they trained their whole life for these 2 weeks.
Yes.
And then there they are eating Egg McMuffins because it didn't matter. It was just calories in, calories out. That's what mattered. That's what we were taught.
That was one of the questions you probably saw that was coming later, but since we're on it, that's a real, to me, that's a real, both an ethical issue and a moral issue. And I really have a hard time with Olympic committees selling out like that. And it also is very pathological that with so many people working with Olympic athletes that have so-called degrees in nutrition, that this kind of stuff would even be allowed. And I'll tell you a couple of experiences I've had. I did a lot of work in Australia and New Zealand. I've worked in Olympic training centers and for Olympic committees all over the world. And they opened a brand new Olympic training center in New Zealand. And it was sponsored by Nestle. And I remember the first time I finished working out there, because they had quite a good weightlifting gym, and I was waiting for Penny to come pick me up. So I went and sat down in the cafe and said, I'll meet you in the cafe. And on the table, they had all these pamphlets put out by Nestle. And the first thing it said, it showed a picture of an athlete scoring a goal or something on the front. You open it up, and it says, tips on nutrition. And the first was like 10 tips. And the first one said, did you know sugar is an important part of a well-balanced diet?
Wow.
And I showed this to Penny. I said, can you believe this? I said,
wow.
First of all, I've never met an athlete that knows what a well-balanced diet is. I've never met, honestly, of professional nutritionists, I've never met a nutritionist that could tell me what a well-balanced diet is. And if they think they can, I say, okay, that's interesting. What about the guy sitting beside you who's got completely different genes and maybe he's Hawaiian or he's, an inland Aboriginal or a Mexican or whatever? How do you do that? And they look at me with a blank stare like, well, that doesn't really matter. So the point being is that all the way at the highest level, then I was working at the Olympic committee in Denmark at their Olympic training center. And 2 things shocked me. One, they had vending machines all over the place with cigarettes in them, and they had chocolate and soda pop and piles of crap. And I'm like, why have you guys even got this stuff in here? And the answer was, but the athletes love it. I said, don't you realize that you're supposed to be upholding the standards that we want athletes to achieve? And don't you realize that ultimately costs them longevity and can decrease their performance? And I went on and they said, but the funny thing is that after me raising a lot of shit, because a lot of the people there knew who I was, I think a year later I came back and they'd removed the cigarettes and they'd removed a couple of the soda pop items. But one of the things that floored me was that I had several of their coaches in my classes, and they all kept asking, well, what do you think about this concept of athletes drinking chocolate milk as a post-workout recovery fuel? And I'm like, where on earth did you get that idea? And apparently some nutritionist had come there and convinced them that was what they were supposed to do. So they had all sorts of athletes drinking chocolate milk everywhere. And I'm not talking about even real chocolate milk. I'm talking about pasteurized commercial poisonous sugary shit.
Hershey's, yeah.
Yeah, and some of them were like arguing with me about this, and so I had to break it right down. And my point I'm driving at is, you're an Olympic athlete. I'm like, what do we do to? I mean, when you see Donald Trump celebrating a McDonald's meal with America's top university football players and marketing that in newspapers all over, it seems like we've just reached this level of incestuous foolishness driven by finances that it's actually sort of a greater message that the whole damn planet's in deep trouble. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I mean, we're completely on the same page. It's a corporate takeover, and it's for money, right? It's the Olympics in particular. They're sponsored by the corporations. No tax dollars go to any U.S. athlete. We're the only one of the only countries in the world not funded by tax dollars. The only tax money that will go is if we get a bid, and the Olympics are in Atlanta or something, then you'll get some tax help to build all the facilities. So it's all corporate sponsors. And so they'll take anyone who's willing to give them money, and it goes to Home Depot, and there's some Kodak and those kind of companies too. But they're just full of factory farm, genetically modified, processed junk food because of money.
I agree with you, but it goes deeper than that, because the coaches and the therapists and the nutritionists working for these teams are allowing it, not intervening. And so the deeper question is, what does that say about our education systems?
That's exactly right. They are never taught food. We took our bar to a registered dietitian conference put on by the American Dietitians Association. Mm-hmm. And we're like, awesome, we're going to get in with the dietitians. This is great. And I got to tell you, some of the younger ones that had started the program at the time were, oh, great, it's organic and it's all real food. It was nuts and seeds, raw honey, and Celtic sea salt. That was in our bar. That's it. And I'll never forget the lady who came up, flipped it over, didn't read the ingredients, right? Just read the nutrition panel, which is a big indicator if you don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, whoa, this has too many grams of fat. It's going to cause heart disease. And I was like, are you really still think that? Like, I'm so embarrassed for you. This is a Brazil nut. And then at that dietitian's conference, literally there was Monsanto had a booth with a little, wow. It was such a prop. It was a little like 5'4" Hawaiian farmer talking about his papaya. I mean, it was just embarrassing. And then Coke, Pepsi, Splenda, they were all there, and they had, when you buy a booth at those places, like $5,000, right?
Oh yeah.
For a little 10 by 10, and we have our little tablecloth and our little things up behind our booth. These guys had signs and booths that were probably $100,000 to make. Oh, yes. And there was a whole breakdown of why artificial sweeteners were good for the body. With science and images and graphics that were just like, here we are in the back, right, with our little Brazil nut bar.
Yeah.
We don't stand a chance against that money. So they're brainwashed and they're uneducated. They don't understand what food is. General Mills paid $80 million when they bought the Lara bar.
Wow.
$80 million. Lara bar was doing $20 million at the time, and they bought them for $80 million. There's 3 ingredients in the Lara bar. Right at the time, like dates, almonds, cashews. And she was a bar who came along. Right, there was sort of the power bar, the chewy, part. Then Cliff came on. Everyone was so excited, all the different flavors and textures. So still soy and a lot of not organic ingredients. And then Laura comes along. She was like kind of right at the right timing. She was the first one with just these real food ingredients, not organic at the time. And then she did very well. Lots of little colorful packages, and she kind of blew up. $20 million in 5 years she started selling.
That's a lot.
And General Mills, why are you going to spend $80 million? You can just make the Larry bar, right? But they don't know how to they can't make food. So they spend $80 million to buy the Lara bar. It just blew my mind. They don't know how to make food. They're just buying little brands and they're scooping them all up, and then they degrade the ingredients. Kellogg's bought Kashi, a San Diego company, back when they were doing some whole food little granolas and cereals. And then they absolutely ruined the company. Now, because maybe this movement's becoming back, real food, organic stuff, Kashi has moved back to Cardiff.
Oh, and, wow.
Yeah, they have a whole team, and they come in and eat it good on you, and they're trying to bring back the legitimacy of the brand, and they're actually funding some transitional farms and trying to do some cool stuff. So I thought that was, they are still owned by Kellogg, but
I told a story in one of my recent podcasts. I was talking to Leslie Manookian, which, if you get a chance to listen to that interview, that's potent. But I was talking to her about, have you ever read the book Beating the Food Giants by Paul A. Stitt?
No.
Oh, it's an old book, but it's loaded. and he was he worked for Quaker Oats. He was a scientist working for Quaker Oats, and he talks about how he was in their library and he found research where they had tested lab rats, feeding them Quaker's puffed oats, I believe it is, and comparing that to another normal food like standard oats. But in a nutshell, the research showed that it was essentially making the rats very sick, giving them diseases and so on and so forth. But because Quaker was doing all sorts of research, but they had buried this and nobody had ever talked about it. And it absolutely shocked him because his job was to research food and make good food. And so he went and met with the director of the company at the time of Quaker Oats and showed him what he'd found in the library. And the director's response was, "Oh, well, if they want to keep eating the crap, we'll keep making it for them." And that was his only response. So
yeah, and they don't care. I mean, and they do try to turn it on to the public and say, well, they're buying it. That is always their line.
Yeah.
But they spend a lot of money brainwashing people that those brands are okay and that you can trust them. You talk to the average person, you think you can go into a grocery store, they're shocked at the lack of testing or anything that goes into getting a food product on the shelf. I really could, minus being certified organic, I could almost put anything on my label and get it into a store. There's no one testing. There's been all kinds of, the first step in busting a brand for lying is another brand turning them in. And it's about a 5-year process with the FDA, lying for protein grams and stuff like that. There's been some brands that have, got busted, like Detour Bar got busted for lying for amount of protein. So it's happened. Mm-hmm. But it's not common. The people go in, they see a food, they see a brand, they think they can trust it. I mean, organic standards aren't the greatest, but there are independent companies going in and checking the processes. It's just that all the processes aren't perfect. But it is, like I said, a starting point.